Hello everyone, it's me again, Gordon. And today I would like to share with you about the post-COVID-19 market changes. And that's also a very important topic right now in Taiwan. Lots of people are talking about it. And today I would like to use these 3 hours to share with you. But before I start, I would like to introduce about myself. So as you can see, I used to be a network engineer from 2009 to 2013. And during that 4 years, my job was mainly maintaining the computers from the end user and also the servers or the machines in our machine room. In that 4 years, I did learn a lot about computers, but I also learned that I'm not that interested into computers. So after 4 years, I decided to quit my job. But in the beginning, I don't know what to do. So I actually started to travel. I first arrived South Africa. You might be wondering where I am, and in the back, trying to hug the big elephant. And besides South Africa, I also spent about 10 months in Europe. Mainly stayed in Belgium, but I also traveled to several different countries. As you can see, the picture was actually taken in Prague, the very famous John Lennon Wall. And in that 10 months traveling, I met lots of people from all over the world. And every day I try to share with them about my story, and they also introduced to me about their culture. But during that time, that's also when I find that I'm not really, I don't know that much about Taiwan as I thought. When I introduce to people about Taiwan, I often just tell them some food and some Chinese culture, and that's it. So that's one of the reasons why after I came back to Taiwan, I decided to become a tour guide, because I want to know more about the land I grew up and about the story around me, and like to share with more people. And another reason is during the 10 months traveling in Europe, I joined several different tours, and I find it's a very interesting way to introduce to the visitors about the story about the country and the culture. So a year after, when I came back, I decided to become a tour guide. And now this is the 6th year. But unfortunately, this year the whole world is facing this disaster because of the COVID-19. And it's really affect our life a lot. Like myself, since March, I have very few job opportunities, and which is a very hard time for me, for my colleague, and also for all the travel agencies. And today I like to share with you, because I believe we still need to keep a hope in our heart, and to find out the solution and try to find how to face this problem. So I would like to start with how COVID-19 affect our life. And first is this picture. This picture was shot in this year in January of the city in China, Wuhan, after the whole city was locked down. And since January start from China and later on to US to Europe, a lot of cities facing this situation. The whole city was locked down. People are not allowed to leave the house, and even before they were informed the city was locked down, they started to go to the grocery store and try to store as much food, daily product as much as they can. In Taiwan, we also facing this problem basically during in January. But we didn't really. The city was never locked down. And after the city locked down, of course, lots of restaurants, lots of shops start to close because no customers, no one enter to the place. Take an example, Zara they close 1,200 stores all over the world, and Starbucks they plan to shut down their stores as well, about 400 from 2020 to 2021. And McDonald's they also announced they are going to close 200 stores in the future in the US. And some of them will close forever, and some of them will turn their store into a mobile store or a pickup restaurant, which is avoid direct contact with their customers. And after the stores are all closing down, of course, people are starting to be laid off as well. Restaurants, hotels, or shopping stores, lots of people start to lose their jobs. And as you can see, there's a picture from IMF. It's about the global unemployment rate this year in April. As you can see, most countries in Asia were actually doing okay. The unemployment rate is about 5 to 10%. But take a look of North America and South America and some countries in Europe and Africa. A lot of them are having a problem. People cannot find a job, and the unemployment rate is much higher than before, even higher than back to 1930s, from 10% to 20%. So that's also a very big problem. And some countries, actually, the government try to subsidize the employees. So if take an example in Taiwan, if a travel agency they don't lay off any employees, then government will subsidize about 40% to 60%. But there are other government use a different way. Like in the US, they subsidize the people who lost their job. So that's probably also another reason why the unemployment rate is so different between different countries. And now let's take a look of this video of the impact of the global economy.
Empty streets have become the new normal during the COVID-19 pandemic. Thousands laid off or furloughed, stores shut down, public gatherings banned, travel restrictions and physical distancing imposed, as a third of the world practices some form of a lockdown to slow down the spread of COVID-19. And all of this is having an impact on our global economy. Industries like airlines, import-export companies, tourism, retailers, events, restaurants, and many other non-essential services have been hit, some harder than others. The United Nations says we may see a $2 trillion shortfall in our global income and a $220 billion hit to developing countries, excluding China, because of COVID-19.
It's catastrophic. We've never seen anything like this. We have a huge portion of the economy and people under lockdown, and that's going to have a huge impact on what can be produced and not produced.
Many services have been able to go digital in an effort to continue running their business, such as e-learning, online fitness classes, food and grocery delivery services, and telecommunication apps.
We're seeing this massive push that's going to result in all kinds of services being available remotely that previously weren't.
And many companies have been able to adapt to working from home, a new pattern that seems to be forming as a part of our new reality.
I think this is certainly going to be one of the long-term legacies of this crisis, is that people will work differently and will interact differently. The crisis is going to motivate capability development and the energy and imperative to move to digital.
But there are many industries that can't switch to a digital platform and continue functioning, such as hair salons, spas, events, movie theaters, and the tourism industry.
80% of the Canadian economy is services. And most of those services require some kind of a personal touch, not all, kind of necessarily high touch, but and those businesses are really just kind of getting slammed. So if they can't pivot to digital online fulfillment and purchase, then they're basically shut down. So if you're in that worst case scenario of can't transform my business model into digital, and if you're a non-staple type of purchase, and you have low financial resilience, access to cash and credit, Wow, that's where we're going to see carnage first.
But a particular industry that is experiencing both the positive and negative effects from COVID-19 is the oil industry. While the steep decline in gas prices isn't good for countries which rely on oil exports, it's a good thing for consumers and can be a benefit to the global economy.
An oil price decline of this magnitude is typically a significant benefit for the global economy in a sort of synchronized downturn, because yes, oil exporting countries have a lot less revenue, but they constitute a much smaller share of global consumers than the oil importing countries do. And when you want a global recovery to begin or strengthen, you really have to have the largest number of people face a declining price of an item that they always buy, namely oil. So overall, this is a benefit, in my opinion, in the short run for the global economy.
It's only been a few weeks since parts of the world have essentially come to a halt, so figuring out how long this economic decline will last is a challenge.
Very difficult to call anything that requires us to know things that we still don't know. I mean, even the experts, epidemiologists and virologists, are still trying to figure this out.
Health experts have said it could be months before we start seeing signs of change, and social distancing could continue for quite some time depending on how much the virus continues to spread. So in the meantime, there will continue to be a great deal of pressure placed on governments.
It will be the role of the government, frankly, to ensure income security for people, and to the extent possible, also provide the kind of mitigating factors that allows companies to survive even if they have no business. That, for instance, would mean subsidizing the wages of workers, facilitating that they can roll over loans, offering state-guaranteed cheap loans and things like that.
What we know at this point based on experts is that social and physical distancing as well as washing your hands helps slow down the spread of the novel coronavirus. And the sooner it comes to a halt, the faster the economy can begin recovering. Thanks for watching Global News. If you want to stay up to date on the latest breaking national and international news, be sure to subscribe to our channel.
And another industry that's facing a very big problem, facing the biggest challenge, is the airline industry. This year till July, there are already 23 airline companies announced bankrupt. And in last year, in 2019, there are a total 4.5 billion people travel through international airline. And this year, in April, there are only 31 million. And last time we have this number of traveling passengers was in 1970. So that was 50 years ago. And the next picture you can see is from the UNWTO. It's about COVID-19 related travel restrictions during the June this year. And as you can see, most of the countries having this deep blue color, and that means complete or partial closure of borders. And several countries suspension of flights. So this means most of the countries until June, the borders were closed and people are not allowed to travel anymore. And that's causing another problem because in the past, lots of people work in different countries. And take example, I have a friend who and his wife, they both work in China, but in two different cities. But this year, his wife came back to Taiwan to deliver their kid. And after the kid was born, she stayed in Taiwan to look after her. But her husband, which is my friend, during that time, that was in March, and Taiwan, the border was completely closed, so he couldn't came back to see his child. He has to wait till April when there's this intense and people can finally come back to Taiwan. But before he saw his daughter, he has to wait 14 days for the quarantine. And a few weeks later, he went back to China to work, and another 14 days quarantine. So this is a hard time for families because especially if they work in different countries, And they are lucky because they're still able to see each other. But there are some other countries that people live in other countries. They are not. They are not. It's a lot harder to see their families. The next picture is the schedule of flights this year and compare the percentage change compared to a year earlier. As you can see, in China, since the end of the January, the numbers dropped down very quickly. But after February and March, when the virus was finally slowly to be controlled, it started to going back. But till June, it's still 20% lower compared to a year before. But other countries like America, like European countries, after February and between February and March, the line dropped down very quickly. And after May, when things start to become better, slowly heading up. But in June, in the US, still 57% difference, and in Italy, in Sweden, 75 to 80% lower compared to a year before. And of course, because nobody are allowed to take airlines to take plane to travel, so airline companies have to lay off their employees. And this year so far, there are already 400,000 people who work in airline have been fired because of the coronavirus. And there's worse to come. As you can see, in Asia already 10,000 people, and in North America already 13,000 people. In Taiwan, people are quite lucky because the airline companies, they are still doing okay, so they haven't laid off any employees. But according to the attendants I met before, although they still have their job, but they only take very basic salary, and they only have a chance to fly once every 2 to 3 weeks. So that's a very, very big difference. And there's worse to come because just in July, the IATA just announced that the global passenger traffic will not return to pre-COVID-19 levels until 2024. In May, they had a conference, and during that time, they believe it will return back to normal in 2023. But 2 months later, they changed their mind. It's going to be delayed for another year. And the reason because from May to July, lots of countries, their borders are closed, and so people still cannot travel in between different countries. And also, the second wave is hitting a lot of countries like America, South America, some countries in Europe. So apparently, the COVID-19 is not fully controlled yet. So that's why they believe it will only recover after 2024. And the next video will show you about the impact on the global airline. Let's take a look.
The COVID-19 outbreak has strained global airlines to the brink. And in the United States, major carriers are scrambling to react to the unfolding pandemic.
We've seen a dramatic drop in demand that really the industry hasn't seen since 9/11.
The next few months will be ugly for the travel industry in terms of both demand and their financial performance.
The initial coronavirus outbreak caused a massive drop in air travel inside of China between January and February. As the virus has spread, both vacationers and business travelers have curbed their plans. And on March 11, 2020, President Trump announced that travel from parts of Europe to the US would be halted for 30 days, which later expanded to include Ireland and the UK. Airlines around the world scrambled to find a way to survive without passengers.
There have been discussions about whether to tell people not to fly.
It's the worst crisis to hit the air travel industry since the 9/11 terror attacks. Delta Airlines has cut its capacity by 70%. United Airlines has cut 65% of its capacity, and American Airlines has cut 50% of its capacity.
When an airline says they're going to cut capacity, that means they're going to cancel some flights. And that could be canceling frequencies in a route that has lots of frequencies in it, or it could mean stopping flying between two cities they've been flying before. Airlines talk about capacity as the number of seats they have in the air at any time, or really the number of seats they have out for sale at any time.
Internationally, Norwegian, SAS, and Lufthansa have suspended most of their operations, and more cutbacks are expected from other airlines.
The demand picture is worse than after 9/11. And we have no visibility as to when things are going to recover. On the range of possibilities, sure, there's a scenario where a couple months from now, maybe coronavirus isn't eradicated, but things are more stable and health authorities are changing their advice and people are willing to get back on airplanes. But, that at this point is the most optimistic scenario, months of disruption.
The U.S. Senate just reached a deal on a massive $2 trillion relief package to help with industries and individuals hit by the coronavirus pandemic. The airlines wanted $58 billion from the package, and the exact details on what ended up in the deal remain vague. What we do know now is that airlines won't be able to buy back stock or hand out bonuses to CEOs as part of the deal. And they won't need to pay back the direct cash grants they receive, though the government will take an equity share. The airlines must also agree to refrain from layoffs until later in 2020. Airlines run on tough margins, and regional startups go under every year. It is easy to see why the COVID-19 outbreak concerns airlines. In 2019 alone, 23 airlines closed shop, including WOW Airlines and Thomas Cook, and that's before the coronavirus pandemic. And in 2020, Alaska Airlines said it has seen 265,000 fewer bookings for March than in 2019. The impact to airline travel in China was rapid and vast. Flights dropped by more than 80%, according to the Civil Aviation Administration of China. The onset of quarantines inside China, starting in Wuhan, grounded hundreds of airliners. In 2016, 20 million travelers used the Wuhan International Airport. And Beijing, where an $11.4 billion state-of-the-art airport was just opened, ranks as the second busiest city for air travel in the world. Even in areas not quarantined by the Chinese government, citizens were reluctant to travel. Disease spreads when people are stuck in close proximity to each other, something airlines are infamous for. As the COVID-19 outbreak spread in the United States, planes began traveling with near-empty cabins as passengers canceled their flights. People were told to limit their activities and embrace social distancing. That's not so easy at 30,000 feet. Administration officials even recommended that those at the highest risk, such as the elderly or those with underlying health problems, not fly at all. All those flights being grounded has a ripple effect on the industry.
The challenge for everybody is nobody knows when this virus is going to be addressed, when it will start to abate, when people will feel more confident about flying, and importantly, when business travelers will return to the skies.
This isn't the first major disruption the airline industry has faced. After the 9/11 terrorist attacks, aircraft were grounded throughout the United States and no flights were allowed in or out of the country. Besides the immediate concern over stranded passengers, airlines took a massive financial hit. It took a $15 billion bailout from Congress to keep major airlines afloat. Another recent disaster for the airline industry was the eruption of the Island Mountain Glacier volcano in Iceland. When the volcano erupted, a massive plume of ash was released into the atmosphere, making the most efficient air routes between Europe and America unusable. The incident cascaded and slowed down global routes, as aircraft and passengers were stranded or redirected to much longer routes. The 2008 recession also caused a slowdown in air travel. One of the industry's most lucrative clientele, business travelers, dropped to all-time lows. During 2008, the U.S. airline industry lost just more than $5 billion.
To put it into context, after 9/11 in 2002, the industry had a big, lost 1.5%. I mean, in other words, air travel was down 1.5%. That was pretty tough. The Great Recession, we lost about 1%. This year, we could lose 10%.
Airlines are more than just a way to get from point A to point B. They are a point of national pride. In previous economic slowdowns, governments around the world have stepped in to prevent national carriers from going under.
The last time the government rescued airlines following 9/11, the government actually made money on that. It basically got a stake in these airlines and sold its stake years later at I believe about a $300 million profit, similar to the automaker bailout.
Besides getting bailouts and economic stimulus, airlines also take their own actions to survive sudden downturns. They cut routes such as daily shuttle flights between cities and also long-haul flights with high overhead costs.
When you're in trouble, the first order of business is fly the airplane. Make sure you know how much fuel you have, where you are, where you're going, that your wings are straight and level. And that's kind of where the industry is right now. Okay, where are we? What do we need to do? And what that means is they need to preserve cash, as much cash as they can, which means they're canceling flights that would likely lose cash, but continuing to fly flights that are generating cash.
Some airlines have already grounded large portions of their aircraft and laid off staff in hopes of resuming operations after the pandemic has subsided. Airports and all the workers who make the day-to-day operations run will also be affected by the slowdown. And aircraft manufacturers like Boeing are looking for federal help.
Boeing was fortunate to be able to get through one major crisis that might have killed a lot of other customers. That, of course, the grounding of the Boeing MAX, who's too big to fail. The candidates for that, a wider swath of the economy than it would have previously been. But the arguments Boeing would make is, look, Boeing is America's biggest exporter. There's no other company that exports more to the world than Boeing does. It employs, of course, a lot of people. And yeah, it's a producer of goods that are key to national security, no question about that. Again, a lot of other people certainly be in line, a lot of other people and companies for government aid.
The potential bailout is already facing some serious pushback from lawmakers.
United Airlines just announcing that they will lose money in the first quarter, not make money.
Boeing is suspending its production operations up in the Puget Sound area.
In normal pre-pandemic times, Boeing might have been a sure thing for a government bailout. But there are several other industries and sectors lining up for government assistance because of the coronavirus. The financial outlook for airlines just took a nosedive. And while the pandemic ranks as the biggest disruption in aviation history, it perhaps hit at an advantageous time for carriers.
9/11 happened on a Tuesday. By that Saturday, U.S. Airlines were laying off tens of thousands of employees. Our Mercontinental, later part of United, went first. 12,000 layoffs, 20% of its workforce. And within a few weeks, 75,000 U.S. airline jobs were gone. This time, weeks into the crisis, U.S. Airlines, the major ones anyway, still hadn't laid off their first person, even though the capacity cuts this time have been far greater.
The golden age of air travel has left airlines with full coffers, especially American-based companies. The liquid assets of the major airlines and most of the regional players are in good shape. And unlike after the 9/11 terrorist attacks, there probably won't be a need for massive reorganizations of the major airlines.
I don't think of it exactly like 9/11, however, because after 9/11, the industry was forced to restructure in some really dramatic ways. Several airlines went into bankruptcy protection. Airlines closed hubs that didn't make much sense after 9/11. There were big changes for customers in terms of security and on the airplane, the door to the cockpit and the procedures on the airplane. I don't see those kinds of changes coming with this, at least not yet.
Mechanics, suppliers, and pilots for the most part aren't getting laid off en masse as of yet, and those that are hopefully only being laid off temporarily. It is expected that there will be a need for them shortly after the pandemic subsides. The problem with the pandemic is that no one really knows how long this could go on.
For U.S. airlines, look, if you could assure them that this is going to be a 2 or 3 month issue, I don't even know that they would be wanting government aid and taking some of the strings attached to that. Most of these U.S. airlines would be positioned to get through a months-long disruption. The problem is they just don't know how long it's going to go on, and to keep employing people, paying people basically to stay home indefinitely, they would quickly run out of money. That's a key difference between this crisis and 9/11.
Airlines are well positioned in the short term compared to previous downturns. However, the request for stimulus from the government indicates the industry is worried about how long this will last.
Airlines thought they were prepared for anything, and it turns out they were prepared for anything except this.